Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the main conference room aboard the UES Harmony and watched history unfold before his eyes. The ship hummed quietly around him as it drifted through space near the neutral zone where humanity would meet an alien species for the first time. Jake felt his heart beating fast in his chest as he adjusted his uniform one more time. He was just a lieutenant, barely important enough to be in the room. But Captain Helen Brooks had chosen him to observe the meeting because of his skills with languages and his calm nature under pressure. The doors at the far end of the room slid, open with a soft hiss. Jake held his breath as the first aliens he had ever seen walked into the room. The Valdari were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Their eyes were a deep violet color that reminded Jake of the sunset back on Earth. They moved with perfect grace, as if every step had been planned and practiced for years. Their leader was a woman who appeared young by human standards, though Jake knew that alien ages were hard to judge. She wore robes of silver and deep purple that flowed around her like water. This was Princess Lyra Veltar, heir to the throne of the Valdari Empire. Captain Brooks stepped forward to greet the aliens. She had spent months learning the proper words and gestures for this moment. Jake watched as she performed the formal greeting ritual that human diplomats had learned from long-distance communications with the Valdari. The captain bowed her head exactly the right amount and spoke the ancient words of welcome in the alien language. Princess Lyra responded with the same perfect formality, her voice clear and musical, but somehow cold. The gift ceremony began immediately. Jake had heard about this tradition during the briefing sessions. The Valdari believed that the value and beauty of gifts showed the respect between two peoples. Captain Brooks gestured to her team, and they brought forward humanity's finest offerings. There was a quantum processor that could solve mathematical problems faster than any computer the Valdari had seen. There was a small fusion reactor that used clean technology to create incredible amounts of energy. Human artists had created sculptures and paintings that showed the beauty of Earth and the creativity of human minds. Each time the humans presented a gift, Princess Lyra accepted it with a slight nod. Her violet eyes looked at each item for exactly the right amount of time before she handed it to one of her attendants. Jake could see that she was following a script, performing her role as perfectly as a dancer who had practiced the same routine 1,000 times. But something about her expression made him think she was not really seeing the gifts at all. The Valdari gifts were even more impressive. They presented crystals that glowed with their own inner light and could store massive amounts of information. They showed the humans' energy matrices that could power entire cities without any fuel. There were works of art made from materials that did not exist on Earth, shaped into forms so beautiful that several human observers gasped with wonder. Each gift represented hundreds or thousands of years of Valdari civilization and technology. That was far beyond anything humans had achieved. Jake noticed that Princess Lyra presented these gifts with the same perfect formality she had shown when receiving them. Her voice never changed tone, her posture never shifted, and her expression remained calm and distant throughout the entire ceremony. It was as if she was performing a role in a play rather than participating in a historic moment between two species. Dr. Ryan Cole, the ship's expert on alien biology, stood near Jake and whispered quiet explanations about what they were seeing. He told Jake that the Valdari had developed their formal culture over thousands of years. They valued order, efficiency, and predetermined roles above everything else. Every Valdari knew exactly what they were supposed to do in every situation, and they did it perfectly every time. There was no room for surprise, creativity, or personal choice in their society. As the ceremony continued, Jake found himself watching Princess Lyra more carefully. Despite her perfect performance, he began to notice tiny details that others might miss. When Captain Brooks spoke about human exploration and the desire to discover new worlds, the princess's eyes seemed to focus more intently. When the human diplomat mentioned families and children back on Earth, Jake saw a slight change in the princess's breathing. These were small things, almost invisible, but they made Jake think that perhaps there was more to this alien leader than her formal exterior showed. The other Valdari delegates were even more rigid than their princess. They stood like statues, never moving unless their role in the ceremony required it. Their faces showed no emotion at all, and they spoke only when asked direct questions. Jake began to understand that the Valdari had trained themselves to suppress any personal feelings or reactions. Everything they did was calculated to serve their empire and maintain their perfect social order. Captain Brooks invited the aliens to tour the human ship and learn about Earth culture. Princess Lyra accepted with polite words, but Jake could see that she was not really interested. She walked through the corridors of the Harmony like someone completing a required task rather than someone curious about a new species. Her attendants followed her in perfect formation, taking notes on everything they saw, but showing no signs of wonder or excitement. The day ended with formal speeches about friendship between the two species and hopes for future cooperation. Princess Lyra delivered her speech with the same musical voice and perfect pronunciation she had used all day. But as the aliens prepared to return to their own ship, Jake caught her looking back at the conference room where images of Earth and human life were still displayed on the viewing screens. For just a moment, her perfect composure seemed to crack, and Jake thought he saw something like longing in her violet eyes before she turned away and followed her attendants out of the room. The next morning brought a break in the formal negotiations, and Jake found himself walking through the ship's observation deck when he noticed something unexpected. Princess Lyra was standing alone in front of one of the computer terminals, looking at information about Earth. Her usual group of attendants was nowhere to be seen, and for the first time since the aliens had arrived, she seemed like a person rather than a perfect diplomatic machine. Jake stopped and watched from a distance as the princess scrolled through images and videos of human life. She had found the cultural database that Captain Brooks had prepared to help the aliens understand humanity. But instead of looking at the sections about human government, technology, or military capabilities, Princess Lyra was studying the parts about families and children. Jake saw her pause at a video of human children playing in a park, running and laughing as they chased each other around trees and playground equipment. The princess touched the screen gently, as if she was trying to reach through it to touch the children themselves. Jake had never seen any of the Valdari show such a personal reaction to anything. Her perfect posture had relaxed slightly, and her violet eyes were wide with something that looked like wonder. She watched the video several times, then moved on to images of human families eating meals together, celebrating birthdays, and reading stories to small children before bedtime. Jake felt someone approach behind him and turned to see Commander Lisa Parker, his direct superior. She followed his gaze to where Princess Lyra was still absorbed in studying human family life. Commander Parker frowned and shook her head slightly. She whispered to Jake that he should not interfere with what the princess was doing. The diplomatic situation was too delicate for a junior officer to risk causing problems by approaching an alien leader without permission. But Jake could not stop watching the princess. She had moved on to a section about human recreational activities and seemed fascinated by the concept of people doing things simply because they enjoyed them. She studied videos of humans playing sports, creating art, dancing, and singing together. Her fingers traced patterns on the screen as she watched humans expressing themselves freely, doing things that had no purpose except personal satisfaction and joy. Jake remembered his briefing about Valdari culture and realized why these images might be so strange to the princess. Dr. Ryan Cole had explained that the Valdari had eliminated what they called inefficient behaviors from their society long ago. Every action a Valdari took was planned and purposeful, designed to serve their empire and maintain social order. The idea of doing something simply because it felt good or brought happiness was completely foreign to them. As Jake continued to observe, he saw Princess Lyra discover information about human childhood development. She read about how human children learned through play, how they formed emotional bonds with their parents and siblings, and how these early relationships shaped their entire lives. The princess spent a long time studying diagrams that showed how human brains developed differently when children experienced love and affection compared to when they were raised without emotional connections. Commander Parker touched Jake's shoulder and reminded him quietly that they had duties to attend to elsewhere on the ship. But Jake found it hard to leave. There was something about the way Princess Lyra was studying this information that made him think she was not just learning about humans for diplomatic purposes. She seemed to be discovering something about herself, or perhaps about possibilities she had never known existed. Later that day, Jake sought out Dr. Ryan Cole in the ship's laboratory. The scientist was analyzing samples that the Valdari had provided as part of their cultural exchange. Jake asked him to explain more about how Valdari society worked and why they had chosen to eliminate emotional connections from their culture. Dr. Cole put down his instruments and turned to face Jake with a serious expression. The doctor explained that the Valdari had once been very different from what they were now. Thousands of years ago, they had been more like humans, with families and emotional bonds and individual creativity. But their planet had faced terrible wars and disasters that nearly destroyed their civilization. The survivors decided that emotions and personal attachments were the cause of conflict and suffering. They gradually changed their society to eliminate these things using technology and careful breeding to create people who felt no strong emotions and had no personal desires that might conflict with the good of their empire. Jake asked what had happened to Valdari children and families. Dr. Cole's expression became even more serious as he explained that the Valdari no longer had children in the way humans understood the concept. They reproduced through artificial means, creating new individuals who were raised in group facilities by trained caregivers. These new Valdari were taught their roles from birth and never experienced the kind of love and individual attention that human children received from their parents. They grew up knowing exactly what they were supposed to do and never questioning whether they might want something different. This information troubled Jake deeply. He thought about his own childhood, playing with his sister Emma in their backyard, learning to ride bicycles and build tree houses. He remembered the way his mother had read him stories every night, and how his father had taught him to throw a baseball. These memories were some of the most precious things in his life, and the idea that an entire species had chosen to eliminate such experiences seemed incredibly sad to him. That evening, Jake was walking past the guest quarters where the Valdari delegation was staying when he heard something unusual. It was a sound like crying, very soft and muffled, coming from the direction of Princess Lyra's room. Jake stopped and listened, unsure whether he should investigate or respect the princess's privacy. The sound came again, definitely the sound of someone in emotional distress. Jake knew that Commander Parker would not approve of him approaching the princess without permission, but his human instincts told him that someone who was crying might need help. He moved closer to the princess's door and spoke her name softly, asking if she was well. The crying stopped immediately, and after a long moment, Princess Lyra opened the door. She looked different than she had during any of the formal meetings. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and her violet eyes were red and puffy. She stared at Jake for several seconds without speaking, as if she was trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she stepped back and allowed him to enter. Her quarters, The room was filled with holographic displays showing images and videos from the Human Cultural Database. Princess Lyra had been studying human families and children for hours, and Jake could see that the experience had affected her deeply. She told him in her musical voice that she had never seen anything like human emotional connections before. She asked him whether it was true that human children were raised by the same people who created them, and whether these people called parents actually chose to spend their time caring for young ones simply because they loved them. Jake confirmed that this was true and tried to explain how human families worked. He told her about his own sister Emma and how they had grown up together, sharing experiences and supporting each other through difficult times. He described how his parents had sacrificed their own comfort and desires to make sure their children were happy and healthy. Princess Lyra listened to every word with intense concentration, as if she was trying to understand a completely alien concept. Jake spent the next 2 days thinking about his conversation with Princess Lyra. Her questions about human families had revealed just how different their two species really were. He could not stop thinking about the sadness he had seen in her violet eyes when she asked whether human parents truly chose to love their children. The idea that love could be a choice rather than a duty seemed to fascinate and confuse her at the same time. Major Karen Stone called Jake to her office on the 3rd day of negotiations. She had heard about his unofficial meeting with the princess and was not pleased. Major Stone reminded Jake that he was a junior officer with no authority to conduct diplomatic conversations with alien leaders. She warned him that the negotiations were at a delicate stage and that any mistakes could damage the relationship between humans and Valdari for generations to come. Jake listened to the Major's concerns and promised to follow proper protocols in the future. But as he left her office, he could not shake the feeling that Princess Lyra needed something that formal diplomacy could not provide. The image of her studying human family videos with such longing stayed in his mind. He began to wonder whether there might be a way to help her understand human connections better without violating his orders. That evening, Jake was alone in his quarters when he remembered something important. Before leaving Earth for this mission, he had visited his sister Emma and her family. His 7-year-old niece, Lucy, had given him a small gift to take with him into space. It was a friendship bracelet that she had made herself, woven from bright, colored threads in patterns of blue, green, and yellow. Lucy had told him that the bracelet would help him remember home while he was exploring the stars, and that it would bring him good luck on his adventure. Jake had kept the bracelet in his personal belongings, taking it out occasionally when he felt homesick or lonely. It was not valuable by any measure that mattered to adults. The threads were ordinary materials from Earth, and the weaving was simple and somewhat uneven because it had been made by a child's hands. But every time Jake looked at it, he remembered Lucy's excited face as she presented it to him, explaining how she had chosen each color because they were his favorites. Not an idea began to form in Jake's mind. The official diplomatic gifts had been impressive displays of technology and art, but they had not seemed to touch Princess Lyra in any meaningful way. She had accepted them with perfect politeness, but no real interest. However, her reaction to learning about human emotional connections had been completely different. Perhaps what she needed was not another demonstration of human achievements, but an example of human heart. Jake knew that approaching the princess again would be risky. Major Stone had made it clear that he should not interfere with diplomatic protocols, but he also remembered the sound of crying that had come from Princess Lyra's quarters, and the way she had asked him whether human love was real. If there was a chance that a simple gesture could help her understand something important about humanity, Jake felt that he had to try. The next day brought another break in the formal negotiations. Jake waited until he saw Princess Lyra's attendants leave her alone in the observation lounge where she often went to study human cultural materials. He approached her carefully, making sure that no other Valdari were nearby to witness their conversation. Princess Lyra looked up from the computer terminal where she had been reading about human holiday traditions, and Jake could see recognition, and perhaps even relief in her violet eyes. Jake told the princess that he had something he wanted to share with her, something that might help her understand human relationships better than any of the official cultural materials could. He explained that it was not a formal diplomatic gift, but a personal gesture, the kind of thing that humans did for each other when they cared about someone's happiness. Princess Lyra listened with the same intense attention she had shown during their previous conversation, and she agreed to see what he had brought. Jake reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out Lucy's friendship bracelet. The colorful threads seemed to glow under the soft lights of the observation lounge. He held it gently in his palm and began to explain its significance. He told Princess Lyra about his niece Lucy, how she was just 7 years old and full of curiosity about the world. He described how Lucy had spent several evenings working on the bracelet, choosing each thread color carefully and learning new weaving techniques to make it special. Most importantly, Jake explained the concept behind the gift. Lucy had not made the bracelet because she expected anything in return, or because it was required by any rule or tradition. She had made it simply because she loved her uncle and wanted him to have something that would remind him of home and family while he was far away in space. The bracelet represented what humans called unconditional love, the kind of caring that asked for nothing except the happiness of the person being loved. Princess Lyra stared at the bracelet in complete silence. Jake could see her trying to process the idea of a gift that had no political purpose, no economic value, and no social obligation attached to it. She asked him whether Lucy had been ordered to make the bracelet by her parents or teachers. When Jake explained that the idea had come entirely from Lucy herself, the princess seemed even more confused and amazed. Jake offered the bracelet to Princess Lyra, explaining that he wanted her to have it as an example of how humans expressed affection for each other. He told her that giving it to her felt right because she was trying so hard to understand human emotions and relationships. Lucy would be happy to know that her bracelet had helped an alien princess learn about love and friendship, even though Lucy would probably never meet the princess herself. For a long moment, Princess Lyra did not move. She looked at the simple bracelet as if it was the most precious object she had ever seen. Jake began to worry that he had made a terrible mistake, that the gesture was too informal or inappropriate for someone of her royal status. But then something extraordinary happened. Princess Lyra's perfect composure began to crack, and Jake saw emotions cross her face that he had never seen any Valdari display. Her violet eyes filled with tears, something that Jake had learned was extremely rare for her species. Her breathing became uneven, and her hands shook slightly as she reached out to touch the bracelet. She asked Jake in a whisper whether he was certain that a child had made this gift purely out of love, with no expectation of reward or recognition. When he confirmed this again, Princess Lyra began to cry openly, tears streaming down her pale blue cheeks. Jake felt panic rising in his chest as he realized that his simple gesture had caused a much stronger reaction than he had expected. Princess Lyra was experiencing emotions that her culture had trained her to suppress, and he was not sure whether this was helping her or causing her harm. He offered to take the bracelet back, but the princess clutched it to her chest and shook her head firmly. Through her tears, Princess Lyra told Jake that she had never received a gift like this before. Every present she had ever been given was part of a political ceremony or social obligation. No one had ever offered her something simply because they wanted her to be happy. The idea that a human child would create something beautiful for someone she had never met, just because it might bring comfort to a stranger, was the most wonderful and heartbreaking thing the princess had ever heard. Jake watched as Princess Lyra carefully tied the friendship bracelet around her wrist with trembling fingers. The bright colors stood out vividly against her silver robes and pale blue skin. She stared at it for a long time, turning her wrist to see how the threads caught the light. For the first time since the aliens had arrived, Jake saw Princess Lyra smile with genuine happiness rather than diplomatic politeness. The change in Princess Lyra was immediate and impossible to hide. When she returned to the formal negotiations that afternoon, every person in the room could see that something fundamental had shifted. The friendship bracelet glowed brightly. On her wrist, visible to everyone, despite her attempts to conceal it beneath her flowing silver robes. More importantly, her entire demeanor had transformed from the perfect diplomatic machine Jake had observed on the first day to someone who seemed genuinely present and engaged with what was happening around her. Valdari delegates noticed the change immediately, and Jake could see their confusion and concern as they watched their princess display emotions they had never seen before. During the afternoon session, Princess Lyra asked unexpected questions about human child development, family structures, and the concept of unconditional love. Her inquiries went far beyond the formal diplomatic topics that had been planned for. Discussion, and her violet eyes showed a hunger for understanding that had been completely absent from her previous interactions. Dr. Samantha Bell, the ship's chief psychologist, observed these changes with professional interest and growing concern. She had been studying Valdari behavior patterns since their arrival, and Princess Lyra's transformation represented something that should have been impossible according to everything they knew about the alien species. Dr. Bell approached Captain Brooks privately and suggested that the princess might be experiencing a psychological breakthrough that could have serious consequences for both species. Jake found himself at the center of attention when Captain Brooks called him to her ready room that evening. The captain had learned about his gift of the friendship bracelet to Princess Lyra, and she needed to understand what had happened and what it might mean for their mission. Jake explained his actions honestly, describing how he had seen the princess's fascination with human family relationships and his decision to offer her a concrete example of human emotional connection. Captain Brooks listened to Jake's explanation with a mixture of understanding and concern. She recognized that his intentions had been good and that he had acted out of compassion for someone who seemed isolated and confused. However, she also understood that his gesture had created a diplomatic situation that no one had anticipated or prepared for. The princess's emotional transformation was affecting the entire negotiation process, and the other Valdari delegates were becoming increasingly agitated by her behavior. The situation became more complicated when Princess Lyra requested a private meeting with Dr. Bell to discuss human emotional development in greater detail. During this conversation, the princess revealed information about Valdari society that shocked the human psychologist. She explained that her people had not simply chosen to eliminate emotions from their culture, but had used genetic modification and psychological conditioning to make such feelings physically difficult or impossible for most Valdari to experience. Princess Lyra told Dr. Bell that she had always felt different from other members of her species, as if something important was missing from her life. She had experienced vague feelings of emptiness and longing that she had never been able to understand or explain. The official Valdari teachers had told her that these sensations were defects that would fade as she matured and learned to fulfill her role properly. But seeing human families and receiving Jake's friendship bracelet had awakened something in her that felt more real and important than anything she had ever experienced before Dr. Bell realized that Princess Lyra might be what humans would call a genetic throwback, someone whose DNA had retained the capacity for emotional connections that most Valdari had lost generations ago. The friendship bracelet had not created new feelings in the princess, but had triggered the expression of emotions that had always been present but suppressed. This discovery had profound implications for understanding Valdari society and the true cost of their cultural transformation. The crisis deepened when the senior Valdari delegates demanded a private meeting with Captain Brooks. They were led by High Counselor Vex Morthane, an ancient alien whose pale blue skin had taken on a grayish tint with age. The High Counselor expressed grave concern about Princess Lyra's behavior and demanded to know what humans had done to contaminate their air with forbidden emotions. He used the word contaminate as if emotions were a disease. It could spread from one person to another. High Counselor Vex Morthane explained that Princess Lyra's public display of feelings was creating dangerous unrest among younger Valdari throughout their empire. Word of her transformation had spread through their communication networks, and reports were coming in of other young Valdari beginning to question their society's emotional restrictions. The High Counselor declared that the princess had been corrupted by human influence and must return to Valdari space immediately for corrective treatment. Captain Brooks found herself facing an impossible choice. She understood the Valdari concerns about their social stability, but she also recognized that Princess Lyra seemed to be discovering her true self for the first time in her life. The idea of forcing someone to undergo treatment to eliminate natural emotions went against everything humans believed about individual rights and personal freedom. However, interfering with another species' internal affairs could destroy any hope of peaceful relations between humans and Valdari. The situation reached a breaking point when Princess Lyra learned about her people's demands. She confronted High Counselor Vex Morthane in front of the entire diplomatic assembly, speaking with passion and conviction that stunned everyone present. She declared that she would not submit to any treatment designed to eliminate the feelings she had finally discovered. The friendship bracelet on her wrist seemed to give her strength as she stood up to the most powerful members of her own government. Princess Lyra shocked everyone by revealing that she was not the only Valdari who had retained the capacity for emotions. She spoke about others among her people, particularly younger individuals, who had confided in her about experiencing forbidden feelings like curiosity, affection, and personal desires. These Valdari had hidden their emotions out of fear, believing they were defective or dangerous. But seeing their princess openly display such feelings gave them hope that they might not be alone or broken after all. The confrontation escalated when High Counselor Vex Morthane ordered the princess's immediate return to their ship. Princess Lyra refused to comply, stating that she intended to learn more about human emotional development before making any decisions about her future. She removed the friendship bracelet from her wrist and held it up for everyone to see, explaining that this simple gift from a human child had taught her more about the meaning of existence than all her years of royal education combined. Jake watched in amazement and growing concern as the diplomatic mission transformed into something resembling a civil rights struggle. Princess Lyra had become a symbol of resistance against her own culture's emotional suppression, and her refusal to return to Valdari space was inspiring other young aliens to speak out about their own hidden feelings. But Jake also understood that his simple gesture of kindness had inadvertently sparked what might become an interstellar conflict. The tension in the room became almost unbearable when several younger Valdari delegates began to openly support their princess's position. Commander Zeeth Mordun, who had remained silent throughout the previous negotiations, stepped forward and declared that many young Valdari had secretly questioned their society's elimination of emotional bonds. He revealed that underground networks of emotionally capable Valdari had existed for generations, hiding their true nature out of fear of persecution or corrective treatment. High Counselor Vex Morthane responded with barely controlled anger, declaring that the younger Valdari had been infected with dangerous human ideas that threatened the stability of their entire civilization. He demanded that Captain Brooks immediately surrender Princess Lyra and end all cultural exchanges between their species. The ancient aliens' threats made it clear that the friendship between humans and Valdari hung in the balance, and that Jake's simple gift had become the catalyst for a conflict that could affect the future of both civilizations. The standoff between Princess Lyra and High Counselor Vex Morthane continued for 3 tense days. During this time, more young Valdari began to speak openly about their own experiences with forbidden emotions. Commander Zeth Mordun emerged as an unexpected leader among these emotional dissidents, revealing that he had been secretly communicating with other like-minded Valdari throughout their empire for years. The friendship bracelet that Princess Lyra continued to wear had become a symbol of hope for Valdari, who had spent their lives believing they were defective or alone. Captain Brooks worked tirelessly to find a solution that could satisfy both sides while preserving the possibility of peaceful relations between the species. She organized private meetings between human psychologists and the younger Valdari delegates, allowing them to discuss their experiences in a safe environment. Dr. Samantha Bell discovered that approximately 20% of young Valdari retained some capacity for emotional connections, though most had learned to suppress these feelings completely by adulthood. Jake found himself consulting with senior officers and diplomatic experts about the consequences of his actions. While some blamed him for creating an interstellar incident, others recognized that his gesture had revealed important truths about Valdari society that might never have come to light through formal negotiations. Captain Brooks ultimately concluded that Jake's compassionate instincts had uncovered fundamental issues that needed to be addressed for any meaningful relationship between the species to develop. The breakthrough came when Princess Lyra proposed a radical solution to the crisis. Instead of returning to Valdari space for corrective treatment, she requested permission to visit Earth and study human family structures firsthand. She argued that understanding human emotional development might help her people find a middle path between their current emotional suppression and the chaos they feared would result from unrestricted feelings. The princess specifically asked to meet Jake's niece Lucy, the child who had created the friendship bracelet that had changed her life. High Counselor Vex Morthane initially rejected this proposal as completely unacceptable. He argued that exposing their heir to more human influence would only worsen her condition and potentially spread the emotional contamination to other Valdari. However, the growing support for Princess Lyra among younger members of their delegation forced him to consider alternatives to simply taking her home by force. The High Counselor realized that using violence against their own princess would likely cause the very social unrest he was trying to prevent. Commander Zeth Mordun presented a compelling argument that convinced even some of the older Valdari delegates to reconsider their position. He pointed out that their current system was already failing if so many young Valdari were experiencing forbidden emotions despite their conditioning. Rather than continue to suppress these individuals or eliminate them through corrective treatment, perhaps it would be wiser to study human emotional development and learn how to integrate feelings safely into their society. The negotiations took on a completely different character as both species began to recognize that they had stumbled upon an opportunity for unprecedented cultural exchange. Captain Brooks proposed a carefully structured program that would allow Princess Lyra and a small group of emotionally capable Valdari to spend time with human families on Earth. In return, human researchers would be permitted to study Valdari technology and social structures to better understand how their civilization had developed such remarkable stability and efficiency. Dr. Bell worked with Valdari scientists to design safeguards that would protect both species during these exchanges. They established protocols for monitoring the psychological well-being of Valdari visitors and created support systems to help them process new emotional experiences safely. The human families who volunteered for the program underwent extensive training to understand Valdari, cultural sensitivities, and the challenges faced by individuals. Discovering emotions for the first time, Jake received permission to escort Princess Lyra to Earth for the first experimental visit. The journey gave them time to discuss what she hoped to learn and what she feared about experiencing human family life. Princess Lyra confided that she was terrified of disappointing the humans who had shown her such kindness, but she was even more afraid of returning to her old life of emotional emptiness, now that she knew something better was possible. The princess's arrival on Earth created tremendous excitement in the scientific and diplomatic communities, but Jake made sure that her first real experience was as normal and comfortable as possible. He brought her to his sister Emma's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood where his niece, Lucy, was waiting with barely contained excitement to meet the alien princess who was wearing her friendship bracelet. The meeting between Princess Lyra and Lucy exceeded everyone's expectations. The 7-year-old girl showed no fear or awkwardness around the tall alien with pale blue skin and violet eyes. Instead, Lucy immediately began teaching Princess Lyra how to make more friendship bracelets, explaining the significance of different color combinations and patterns. Jake watched in amazement as his niece treated the heir to an alien empire like any other adult who needed to learn an important skill. Princess Lyra's reaction to this simple interaction was profound. She had never experienced the unconditional acceptance and affection that Lucy offered so naturally. The child's assumption that the princess would want to learn how to make gifts for other people because it would make them happy was a revelation that challenged everything the Valdari had believed about the nature of emotional connections. Lucy's matter-of-fact explanation that people made things for each other simply because they cared introduced Princess Lyra to concepts of generosity and empathy that her culture had deemed impossible. Over the following weeks, Princess Lyra lived with Jake's family and experienced the daily routines of human emotional life. She observed how family members supported each other through difficulties, celebrated each other's achievements, and resolved conflicts through communication and compromise, rather than rigid rules. She learned about concepts like forgiveness, sacrifice, and unconditional love through direct experience rather than academic study. The transformation in Princess Lyra during this time was remarkable. She learned to express her own emotions more freely while also developing empathy for others. She discovered that emotions could be sources of strength and wisdom rather than just chaos and inefficiency. Most importantly, she began to envision ways that her people might integrate emotional connections into their society without abandoning the stability and order they valued. Princess Lyra's reports back to the Valdari Empire sparked intense debates about the future of their civilization. The success of her adaptation to human emotional norms convinced many younger Valdari that change was not only possible, but necessary for their species' continued development. Even some older delegates began to acknowledge that their current system might be suppressing valuable aspects of their people's potential. The cultural exchange program expanded gradually, with carefully selected Valdari individuals spending time with human families, while human researchers studied Valdari social structures and technologies. Both species discovered that they had much to learn from each other. Humans gained insights into creating more efficient and harmonious communities, while Valdari learned about the creative and motivational power of emotional connections. Jake's simple gesture of offering a friendship bracelet to an alien princess had grown into something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The small gift that his niece Lucy had made with colored threads and love had become the foundation for a new kind of alliance between species. Rather than being based solely on political convenience or economic advantage, this relationship was built on genuine understanding and mutual respect for each other's essential humanity. Princess Lyra eventually returned to Valdari space, but she brought with her a collection of friendship bracelets that she and Lucy had made together. She established schools where young Valdari could learn about emotional development in controlled environments, and she worked to create legal protections for individuals who chose to explore their capacity for feelings. The princess had become a bridge between two worlds, helping her people discover that emotions were not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be cultivated and shared. Years later, when Jake looked back on that historic first contact mission, he realized that the most important diplomatic breakthrough had not come from formal negotiations or impressive displays of technology. Instead, it had emerged from a child's simple desire to share something beautiful with a stranger, and from the recognition that the most profound connections between beings were built not on power or fear, but on the quiet courage to care about each other's happiness. The friendship bracelet still adorned Princess Lyra's wrist during every public appearance, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures could change entire worlds.